So for this week, we decided to incorporate our readings with Bias and Media Censorship by Tamara, Zach, Shayla, Azul, and Caroline. So an overview of what we're going to be talking about today in our slides. We will begin with history of Christopher Columbus and Hernan Cortez. So pretty much we will be tying in these two readings with what we learned in class so far. And then we're going to be talking about Hernan Cortez, the second letter, and the Spanish requirement of 1513, the requerimiento. And then from this, we will be tying it in with what is happening today, the media censorship and the bias. And then lastly, we're going to have a couple questions for you guys to put in the discussion board.
Okay, so first for the history of Christopher Columbus, he was not looking for America. He was trying to find a route to Asia for a better way for trading. He was motivated by religion and considered himself divinely selected for his path, and also motivated by money. Religious motivations were important because they were appealing to Ferdinand and Isabel. They thought the more that he traveled, the more he would be able to spread Catholicism throughout Asia. And he described the indigenous people as unthreatening as possible and good-natured and docile. They also had no government, so Ferdinand and Isabel found that attracting because they would be easy to convert. For Hernan Cortez, he was the leader of the expedition into Mexico in 1519. He led to the colonization of the Aztec Empire, which is now Mexico City. He made a name. He made a name for himself, trying to helping colonize Cuba, and he was given control over a number of indigenous people.
So for this slide, I'll be covering the second letter. He starts off by praising the king in every way he possibly can. And then the context of this letter includes how Mexico City is coming together, being developed. There was a quote on page 87 that states, "These people live lives almost like those in Spain." So this quote kind of shows the similarities in the civilization. In this letter, he also describes how the market industry was doing, and he talks about the religious gatherings that were held around the Grand Temple, leading to the media bias and censorship. This letter is an example of how the media can be unfair or biased. For example, Cortez describes that he is doing the right thing for the native people, but it is clear to us now that that this is false and that his intentions were solely money and violence related. This also goes hand in hand with media censorship because this letter only portrays him as a good person.
So next is the Spanish requirement of 1513. It's also known as el requerimiento in Spanish. And it's a declaration of the Spanish monarchy, which was written under Ferdinand and Isabel's rule. And it was written by the Council of Castile jurist Juan López de Palacios Rubios. The declaration was read to the Native Americans to inform them of Spain's right to conquest. And the main reason that they use is religion, specifically Catholicism. And the Spaniards considered those Native Americans who resisted as defying God's plan. So they threatened them with violence and execution if they refused to convert to Catholicism. And the importance of the declaration is that, there's a language barrier between the two groups. So it was most likely that the Native Americans didn't understand what was going on or why the Spaniards wanted them to convert to Catholicism. Not only that, but the Native Americans could only rely on what the Spaniards were telling them, since it was really their only source of information outside of the Americas.
So first, I want to connect bias with the natives and how this impacted Hernan Cortez' conquest. Hernan Cortez defeated the local native people through his own use of force by bringing his own group of guys of army. Cortez' view on the indigenous people were pretty much like the ones of the Europeans. The reason is because these two groups were inferior in ways such as culturally, technologically, and religiously. That resulted in Cortez's being biased because pretty much he wanted all of those things. Bias was contributed as it brought out the threat factor for Cortez. Cortez wanted to take full control in his own hands. He believed that if he can make the natives convert to his religion, it would be a successful colonization. Cortez wanted to always be the winner in every situation, and his idea slash bias led him to the conquest. Secondly, I want to interpret bias in today's world, which is through media platform. Media is the biggest platform that produces bias. For example, news such as CNN and Fox lead towards a certain group of individuals, and we are talking politically, such as liberal and conservative bias. So news slash media portray only the things that will seek audiences' attention. For example, media tends to focus on hot topics that will give them the views and ignore other news of substance. The bias in the media has become a platform as an entertainment rather than the actual news slash facts. And then from this, people tend to be more prone to develop bias of their own rather than facts based on the influence of the social media slash news that are going around us.
Next, we're going to discuss censorship in the media. It's important to note the difference between bias and censorship, whereas bias is the leaning of the news being presented to one side or the other. Censorship is the complete disregard for that information or just leaving out of that information. So the textbook definition of censorship is the suppression, alteration, or prohibition of information. It's used to hide things that are deemed inappropriate to the general public or governments might see as a threat to their power. Most countries have laws preventing these media censorships, so that way people can still express their opinions and views, but there are almost always loopholes around the laws preventing these where people can still choose to present the news that they would like. So we're going to compare and contrast censorship in the media from today, from early Spain. So today, there are many countries that have very strict censorship laws where the government is in complete control of what gets presented to the general public. The US has an executive order preventing these online censorships, so that way people can still post what they would like on online platforms. However, things like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook still have the authority to remove posts that they deem as hateful or hurtful to the general public. Also, having multiple media sources and outlets to get information make it harder to completely censor certain things. And the government doesn't have complete control of what is presented to the public. In early Spain, there were no laws preventing censorship because censorship was not necessarily as well of a concept as it is now. All news and information came from one source, and so they could choose what they presented to the public, which is a form of censorship. The people who were reporting information to the king, such as Hernan Cortez, were doing it to please him, as there was a fear against going with the power. They wanted to be in the good graces of the king, and so the information coming to him was going to be only information that would make him happy. So this leads into our questions. Our first question is, do you believe that the media has a strong influence on your decision making? And if so, how? Number two, how much of our news, like CNN or Fox, tends to portray media that is beneficial or pleasing to their audience members? And what are some of the approaches as to how we could eradicate bias and only state factual evidence of each of the given medias? And number three, have there been situations where you have found out the media has left out crucial information to make their preferred party or audience look better?